So we have a real expert with us today. Thank you so much, Ken, for taking the time. I know you've been so busy traveling, so we really appreciate you being here with us today. And with that, Greta and I are going to turn off our microphones and our video and let you have the floor. And guys, along the way, if you have any questions, feel free to throw it in the question and answer box or in the chat, either one. Greta and I will be monitoring those, and we can pipe in to ask your questions. All right. Thanks so much. Here you go, Ken. All yours.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Greta. Good morning, good afternoon, buonasera. If you are calling in from Italy, just got back myself late last night from business trip to Milan. And also want to give a shout out on my bio here. One of my caps and roles is I serve as editor for one of the coaching and consulting journals for the American Psychological Association. And your own Joel DiGirolamo, who is at the national level on the research side of ICF, is one of my associate editors. So for any of you really interested, Joel's published quite a bit and really on top of the game. So a great resource, at least nationally, for all of you in the research in the coaching area. So I'm going to talk a little bit today, and I've got a number of slides we're going to roll through pretty quickly. This is a real passion of mine, and we'll share a little bit about what's so critical about the hats that you wear, and not just increasing insight and awareness of your clients, but more to the point, how do you get them to start new behaviors and hopefully hold on to them and incorporate those in their DNA on a day-to-day basis. So that's the Achilles heel, I think, a lot in coaching and training is the learning transfer. So we'll speak to that, and we'll have lots of insights about the neuroscience behind why it's just so challenging to get people started and obviously to stick with it for any length of time. Personally, I'm really interested in the topic, and I want to share two stories with you, be really brief about it. But one is, as Karen and everyone mentioned, I raise guide dogs for the blind, and actually for the last 20 years I've had a wonderful opportunity to raise 9 puppies. And here's one laying right next to me today. He's about 9 months old now, and his name is Frisco. And if you don't know much about the gig, we actually get these puppies when they're about 8 weeks old and hold on to them for about, on average, about 18 months. And then they go into their technical training, and if medically and they're sound in terms of commands and insight and all that great stuff, they become working service dogs, for this case, for Guide Dogs of America. So we've been doing this for many, many, many years. And it's a great metaphor for how do we teach old dogs, in this case it's kind of newer dogs, new tricks, but the same lessons and learning of how do we in fact pair a command and reinforce things and create an environment where they will develop lasting habits that really do become the eyes for people that are sight impaired or blind. So I've learned a great deal. It's a wonderful metaphor for the coaching work that and research that I'm involved in, that many of your clients truly see you in a way that you're guiding them and become their eyes for enhanced insight about what they're doing well, so they can leverage it and perhaps illuminate some of their own blind spots figuratively in terms of their skills and abilities and impact that enables them to be a lot better. So throughout this presentation, I might go back and refer to some metaphors, analogies with some of the volunteer work that is near and dear to my heart as well. And should you hear in the background any sounds that sound like stomach growling or chewing, it's not me, it's Frisco, who might hopefully not wake up in the next hour or so. Second story is one that is very important to me. Like I said, I got in late last night from Milan, and what I'd love to do when I'm home is blessed to live about 5 blocks from the ocean in Santa Monica, and this is another one of my playgrounds, at least 5 or 6 days a week to go out for my morning run. And every year that we move into the New Year's, if I'm home, I love to go out and sort of inaugurate the new year. And my wife and I have created, my wife doesn't go with me that often right now for daily runs, but she'll join me periodically, is we have sort of a secret club that nobody knows about. And I call it Ken's Running Club. And these are folks that I might see scootering, the new thing in Santa Monica. They might be cycling, skateboarding, rollerblading, running a lot faster than I do. But we actually wait for a while, and my wife and I will introduce them into my club. No one knows they're in it, so it's kind of a funny thing. We'll have an official vote. We'll see if there's anybody that disagrees. and they're in my club, and I can come back from a morning run and just let my wife know, gosh, I've seen, you know, whatever it is, the name for that individual that we've given, and she'll know immediately who it is. And every New Year's, like I say, I love to go out, and on New Year's, what I get to see is a brand new set of people with brand new costumes, great toys, the very latest, and high-tech rollerblades or cycling or whatever else, elliptical bikes that are out there, the kind of cool things, and cool outfits, the latest in shoes and wear. And I just kind of wait for 3 months. That's the cutoff before my wife and I will actually inaugurate any new members. And some of us, we've been doing this since I moved to the beach in 1994. Some of us will nod and say good morning to each other, and others literally will just pass like two ships and the morning here and maybe never acknowledge each other. But the point I want to make is after about March 30th, I kind of haven't had a lot of new members entering my running club because one of the requirements is you do this over and over and over and keep it up. And it's a great illustration every year of lots of people really motivated to get started on things as they are with coaching and therapy and other things that happen in life. But for some reason, there's some impediments that really allow us to incorporate this into our daily rituals that we call habits. So two personal stories about just getting started, getting going, and sort of life lessons, and whether it's animals or humans, what do we need to do? And I'll speak a little bit about what's happened at the brain level for those of you that are interacting with your clients on a day-to-day basis to really enhance what we call new habits. And the funny thing is we are creatures of habit, but the question rhetorically is why are habits just so really challenging and difficult to initiate and maintain? So we'll unlock some secrets today, and as you've got some questions, grab the chat. I won't be reading that now, and at the end we'll hopefully have some time to see if I can dig in and answer some of those. So where we're going to go, I want to talk a little bit about some of the necessary conditions, put on your coaching cap, for successful behavior change, and some of the challenges both acquiring and very critically sustaining new behaviors. There's really a whole psychology on getting started, kind of goal setting, from keeping it up, which is the goal striving part. And I want to answer some questions too at a neural level of how long does it actually take to change a habit? And the answer, there's a lot of myths out there of what's going on, but I want to give you some neurobiological answers that are a little bit daunting for those of us doing coaching. It actually takes a lot longer than most of us really think about to solidify both at a brain level and the behavioral level greater success. So we'll take some questions at the end. So that's where I'd like to go. I've been doing a lot of research in this area for many years. Really interested in sort of the learning transfer, habit behavior change arena for many years, and targeting that around coaching and assessment tools that we specialize in, develop and validate as part of our company. And very interested in just how do we get people to develop the right motivation and skill set to maintain something over time. So it's an area both academically and non-academically we're really interested in as our company, and personally, as I've shared a little bit. So I want to talk a little bit about just a model that I'll introduce. It comes out of a book we have called Clueless, which is our second edition coaching book that looks at some insights about how do we get people to successfully get started and maintain things over time. So the rhetorical question is, what does it take? What are the factors that go into working with your clients and getting them to consider doing things more, less, or differently? And our model, which I won't go into any detail with this slide, does in our book outline in great detail that it's sort of a necessary condition for behavior change, the way the world works, and we can apply this to health psychology and life coaching and career coaching and executive coaching, is people don't spontaneously wake up and the night and just kind of go, wow, I think I'm going to be a better listener, a better delegator, a better leader, or to eat differently, or to work out more frequently. So we need some insight that really prompts us to say, gosh, there's a reason to make things different in my life and or maintain things. And certainly we know intuitively that clients that are unmotivated, we call it the readiness to change continuum based on research by Procrasta and DiClemente, just aren't going to do much. You can nudge them, you can push them, you can manipulate them. They might do it for a while, but the likelihood that they sustain it, they see goals as a chore rather than something that's intrinsically motivated. And I'll share at the end, we used to think about SMART goals. The acronym SMART is a really great way to get people pointed. And today there's some really strong research that suggests that if you want to increase the likelihood that people will keep things, new behavior over time, we want to shift to what's called implementation intentions. It's a little bit of a different frame on how do we set goals with clients. And increasingly, we know that the environment is really important. What kinds of rewards we tack on to goals that we set, how you can engineer that with your clients, and certainly the social network that we have, whether it's peers, life partners, colleagues at work, that really become very critical for that sustaining of behavior over time. And we certainly know in the addictive disorders, if any of you cross over with boundaries to deal with kind of therapy with people with addictive disorders, we know the power of 12-step groups and social networks and social reinforcement for the instrumental and other types of individual social support that keep us going. So this is sort of a framework. I won't go into too much more detail about it, but it does give us a formula, if you will, of what are the ingredients and conditions for successfully getting started and keeping things up over time. And most of us just don't really like change. It's baked into our brain. I'll share a little bit more about that, but we like comfort. We like to approach work and life in a way that doesn't create energy that we have to take away from doing things that our evolutionary brain or reptilian mammalian brain have really engineered us to do. So getting a client to do something a little bit differently or leveraging a strength a little bit more, turning the volume up, is just as difficult as stopping a behavior that's counterproductive or derailing or dysfunctional. So really important. So we're going to talk a lot about how do we create habits? How do we create enough behavior that over time at a neural level and a behavioral level, it becomes seamless, it becomes automatic, it becomes really easy. So I want to do a little exercise with us. It won't take very long. If you've got in front of you a pen or a pencil and something you can write on, what I'm really going to ask you to do is write down your name with your non-dominant hand. So give me your signature, if you will. If you're right-handed, do it left-handed and vice versa. And if you're equally talented with right and left hand, well, use your feet. I don't really care. But write down your name with your non-dominant hand. And it's a really good visceral exercise to really illustrate three aspects of starting new behaviors or sustaining ones we've done, but kind of doing a little bit different way. So hopefully you've sort of drilled through writing your name. And I always ask three questions when I do this with a group, and a little bit hard on, obviously, in a webinar to get your responses. So I'll just post the three questions that I'd like to ask. And that is, did this take a little bit more time to do than your dominant hand? Should for most of us. Did you have to be more cognitively involved? You had to think about it. I know when I've tried to do this while I'm on the call with you, it's like, wow, even though three letters Ken seems easy, that K is sort of weird in a backwards way. And I had to really concentrate to say, how do I do that? And found myself writing the times I've done this before, the E in a traditional way rather than the reverse. So I really want to think about how do we write this in a manner that doesn't require a lot of cognitive energy. And if I say, well, how does your signature look? What's the output? Again, really good example then when we get clients to do some things a little bit differently, we shouldn't expect, nor does the client, perfection, that we want to really ask, again, that rhetorical question, well, gosh, how long would you have to practice signing your name, your signature, with your non-dominant hand? So it really didn't take much time. It was pretty seamless and effortless, and the quality was as strong as your dominant hand. And that's what we're really asking our clients to do with particularly executive coaching, when we're getting them to get some insight about what kinds of behavioral changes will lead to enhanced engagement, performance, and all the great outcomes that we're really trying to get our client to consider in coaching. So it's a good little exercise just to think about why it's so difficult to changing habits and what's involved there. And certainly there's great research that we all know that we sort of go back to where we started. And my story about my running club and New Year's resolutions is a really classic example of people gung-ho on New Year's to go out there and be more physically fit. All the gyms and sports club memberships are dramatically based financially on people signing up at the beginning of the year, and hopefully they'll drop out. They've already got their revenues, so if people aren't taking their spin classes on month 2 but have paid for a series, That's great for the organization, not so good for the individual. So we find in every facet of behavior change, whether it's health, whether it's leadership, that we find a real struggle with getting people to maintain things that are a little bit different from what is automatic. So let's talk about, from a brain perspective, what's going on. One of the questions that people ask all the time, there's some interesting, not a lot of research when we're able now to peer at a neural level of the concept that neurons that really wire together begin to fire together. So if I ask you to sign your signature, your name about 6 to 8 times, you know, over a span of time, that span of time might be 24 hours, 48 hours, and we peer into your brain, we actually can see less neural activation, we call it activation potential, at a neural level, which means there is greater solidification of a network, a pathway, if you will. Doesn't guarantee that people can sign their name or the quality of it or the ease of it will be any better, but intuitively, the more we repeat something, new behaviors, the more I can get my guide dog Frisco to practice a particular command, or beginning to cement that neural pathway that, given his name, given the command, he'll do that pretty routinely, and we'll go, wow, he's really gotten that command down. So there is a neural bit of research that sometimes there's a lot of myths out there of what it takes, but get people to do something 6 to 8 times, again, at a neural level only. We're able to peer into the brain using scans and other types of technologies to really suggest, gosh, we're getting the brain to actively activate and wire together. So keep that in mind. I'm going to be pretty brief about the brain science. It's kind of complicated. If any of you have background in neuroscience, you might criticize what I'm presenting in this one slide, and what I'll say for just a minute or two, as being pretty elementary and pretty unsophisticated. But again, we're not here to teach you neurobiology. And I want to kind of liken our brain to one of the most interesting and complex organs that's really been geared around our survival for, you know, hundreds of thousands or millions of years. And we can talk about the key focus of our brain, particularly the mammalian and reptilian function of the brain, is really doing two things, simply to keep us alive and to approach things that are pleasurable, and most importantly, and very weighing heavily, is avoiding things that are sort of fearful, stressful, challenging, and life-threatening. And right now, it's all subconscious. This part of the brain is modifying how you breathe. It's regulating your cardiovascular mechanisms, your immunity, and it's all kind of under the iceberg. It's something that we can't take conscious effort. We can if we're practicing mindfulness meditation, but generally speaking, these are things that are going on, quote unquote, in the background. It's sort of the Tesla part of your auto drive, and this part of our brain is really geared from a survival perspective. It's highly engineered to, in a moment's flash, to protect us, mostly through what's called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or sort of that fight or flight cortisol response. And it's very powerful. If I had to use sort of a Star Wars analogy, this is the Darth Vader, the dark side, if you will, that can, within a moment's notice, really move to a protective state. It's, from an evolutionary perspective, very advantageous actually to our species. So I don't want to create a picture as if it's negative or bad. But at the end of the day, it is, in fact, very protective of our survival of our species. As we've evolved, we've kind of created a layer around and an interface around this mammalian and reptilian brain that's referred to just grossly as the neocortex, the new part of the brain. And its sole function is to guide us, to provide a little bit of judgment, wisdom, decision-making, to help ferret out, gosh, should we fight? Should we flee? And what might be some better ways of coping as we're evolving with conflict and tension, and when in the old days tribes were protective of each other, how can we build a little bit more emotional regulation, emotional control, emotional awareness, and social intelligence, so that we can, in fact, as a species, continue to survive. And I certainly do a lot of research too in a very narrow area of neuroscience that relates to psychological safety and trust. And for those of you that might have joined me in an earlier ICF presentation, we spoke a little bit about the power of the pro-social hormone called oxytocin, and collaborate with a really cool, genuine neuroscientist right here in California, at Claremont University named Dr. Paul Zak. And Paul and I are currently actually writing and have under review an academic article on how empathy, which is mediated by oxytocin, is an advantage to leadership, and a magazine article that we're actually submitting to a Harvard Business Review on bias, both subconscious and purposeful bias, and today's discussion on diversity and inclusion. So the old brain and the newer brain work in conjunction with each other, and I guess a great analogy for the neocortex, maybe Luke Skywalker and Yoda, and just kind of learning the ways of the Force. But we want to see from a neuroscience perspective that there's what we call a negativity bias, meaning our brain is really very protective, that it will take over in a flash. And in fact, there's a pretty big gap if there's a really loud noise, or God forbid we have another earthquake, which I missed, and the excitement in the last week or so here in the Los Angeles area, we would find that before the new brain sort of thinks about what was that, why is the ground underneath me shaking, should I hide under a desk, should I run outside, what do I do? Our old brain immediately kicks into gear and releases again the stress hormones that help us to survive. So this is the neat and interesting evolution, and why we talk about the old brain kind of hijacking the new brain under pressure, under stress, and under survival situations that we're not thinking really clearly. We're not reasoning. We're not using great judgment. We are, in fact, as a species, getting ready to just protect ourselves in a positive way. So all this has a lot to do with goal setting and the motivation to want to change. And one of the points I'll make that, again, is pretty intuitive, that your clients that you're working with are unwilling and not capable, actually, of setting goals and sustaining goals under stress and pressure. It just is one you're going to have to deal with to make sure their life, work, and non-work are at least at a level of being able to manage and drill down to sort of the toolkit before we get them to consider sustaining work and life. And in fact, again, we know in the addictive disorders literature that relapse is very pronounced when work and life stress is very high. So it, again, hijacks our ability to really reason and think about goals. So as I mentioned, this negativity bias is, as a human species, we go first to avoiding threat, then we will even seek rewards. It's just built into the fight or flight mechanism of helping us, and in some ways kind of interferes with our ability to set goals and change habits. So it's an interesting sidelight to the evolution of our brain. Interpersonal stress, for all of us that are working in service types of industries, coaching is an example of that, teaching, nursing, etc. We find that any stressor will in fact trigger that fight or flight response, but social stressors are particularly unique for buoying up cortisol for a lot longer, and in fact dealing with, even sitting down with a client and reviewing an assessment tool like a personality, strengths inventory, 360 feedback, is a social cue for creating a little bit of resistance, which I'll share a little bit about, that can in fact last for a little bit longer. So I take feedback really seriously as a researcher, and when people interpret and perceive feedback to be judgmental and evaluative and most importantly unfair, it immediately elicits the fight or flight response and minimizes our willingness to really understand and accept that information, and most importantly from a behavior change, activates areas of the brain that diminish motivation to want to get started. So even though our intent might be really wonderful and constructive and positive and supportive as a coach, I'll share with you some really cool hot off the press research from Richard Boyatzis in just a minute that suggests there's better ways of providing feedback and adapting our coaching to facilitate successful habit and behavior change. Love this quote by Mark Twain, that nothing so needs reforming as other people's habits. So again, kind of funny when we're working with clients who our target is their behavior change as well. I think all of you that are on the call, putting on your cap as professional coaches, whatever your area of specialty is, this is a pretty interesting older article, but one that still is germane today based on 50 or 60 years of research and client factors that really are predictive of coaching success. And when we look at habit and behavior change, again, I'm looking at it from a perspective of what's intrinsic to your client, their personality. I'll speak to that in a little bit, their motivation, their makeup, their life history and experience with succeeding and failing. And a lot has to do with what you're doing as well. Kind of your theory, your techniques, not that big of a factor, but obviously plays a big role. The relationship, the rapport, the trust your client has within you, a big effect. And sometimes just the idea of the expectation that I've put a lot of time and energy into a particular effort. I've worked hard to sign my name 1,000,000 times. It still is sloppy, still takes a lot of time. But I believe with a little bit more practice, I can break through and do real well. Sometimes that's the single best predictor of whether or not your clients will succeed. So framing again in a therapeutic or coaching environment, the belief that what they're doing will have positive outcomes is quite powerful, and certainly hope and placebo is in fact a factor that is predictive of coaching success. So I just want to share this one slide. It's not normally what I would present in this particular frame around habit and behavior change, but given who we're talking to today and the work that I do that directly ties into all of you, I thought this was an interesting slide to think about why there's so many variables in getting clients to change behavior. So I want to talk a little bit about Richard Boyatz's research work, again, inserting this today just because of the work you do in the coaching arena. And I'll be, again, pretty elementary about this. It's pretty cool neurobiology. But question number one is, if I were to ask you to do this mathematical addition, and certainly if you have a smartphone, you could ask your little male or female helper like Siri, and they're pretty quick to come up with the answer. Don't need to do it right now on the webinar. But if I could take a brain scan of all of you while you're actually solving this mathematical question, we would find that particular unique areas of the brain are activated simultaneously. So kind of look at this slide here with the color coding, lots of big words here, but we would find a whole network of areas of the brain that we refer to as the task positive network. Sometimes this is called executive functioning, really are operating when I'm asking you to solve a problem, to sit down with the clients and say, you know, Ken, can you explain to me, what do you think are the contributing factors to why we're here today? What might be your action plan towards the end of the session for what you want to commit to doing more or less or differently? Those types of questions, that type of thinking is very problem solving, solution oriented. And we find again that these areas of the brain that are called the task positive network are simultaneously active. So think of this as sort of a motorway, a freeway, a highway that we're driving along when we're trying to solve problems, when we're making decisions, when we're thinking about things, we're being focused, if you will, and simultaneously it sort of activates the sympathetic network in the brain, the fight or flight network. So to think about things, to dwell on it, to do problem solving, for those of you that are using either cognitive behavioral therapeutic approaches in the work you're doing or pseudo CBT, this is really what we're activating. This is what we've been trained to do. It's very much the work of a lot of coaches at some point to really drill down to say, okay, we've got to figure out what are the next steps, what's your goal, how can we evaluate that, who's in the environment that can support you. Very common elements of kind of the coaching work that all of us do. So if we're in a mode of asking those questions and getting our clients to do problem solving and decision making, again, if we could peer into their brains, a whole set and network of areas of the brain are very active simultaneously. And again, that's the label that we've got for this. So let me ask you a second question, and just got back. I basically was working the last week in some very tiny towns in Italy and wound up in Milan with one of our partners there, but didn't get a chance really to do too much R&R. But if you could for a moment, just think about, visualize, where is a holiday or vacation spot that you really can detach. You can just not think about things and be in the moment of just really enjoying what you're doing. And if we have clients do this exercise, again, if we could, you know, wire them up to a fMRI machine or transcranial brain imagery, or figure out another way of measuring what's going on at the brain level, we'd find actually a complete opposite highway that people are on. And it's got a very fancy name. called the default mode network. And it's a little bit different network where we're just kind of detached. We're not really focused too much. It's kind of the things that just pop into your brain when you're sitting still and you're daydreaming, or you're out going for a walk and aren't particularly focused on any one thing. Maybe you're being mindful of the environment. But we have this particular set of areas of the brain that are much more active. And this is the kind of self-reflection and introspection that sometimes we ask clients to do purposely, but they'll do on their own. It's a time where we can have those aha breakthrough moments where we're thinking about something that isn't germane to anything, and all of a sudden we've got a solution to a problem. And this area of the brain, or sets of areas of the brain, is highly organized to relate to the parasympathetic activation, meaning the opposite of the fight or flight. We're relaxed. It's kind of the relaxation area of the brain, of taking your foot off the accelerator. So these are the two things that occur when you're on one freeway or a highway. It's really hard to be simultaneously on the other. So we talk about what our brain does is sort of straddle, if you will, these two freeways, these two directions. And again, you can engineer what you're doing as a coach, as a therapist, as a helper, as a partner, as a guide dog trainer, as to what are you trying to do with your client? Which freeway, if you will, do you put them on based on your probing and your questions and the work you're doing? So the point of this is that Richard Boyatzis has published, actually, in our journal, one of the first articles to ever explore what's happening at a brain level when coaches are using two techniques that are a little bit different from each other that will prompt either this default mode network, kind of the introspection and arena of thinking about what's going on in our body, ourself, our emotions, versus more of a problem-oriented, solution-focused approach, which again is pretty common. So we can either kind of engineer this idea of being analytical and rational, or we can engineer being a little bit more intuitive and experiential based on what you do. And he actually took, I'll be really simplistic about it, in two studies, two groups of men and women through coaching, and then brought them back to his lab and took a snapshot, if you will, of what's going on at a brain level. He was really able to validate that using different coaching techniques and approaches put us on a different highway or freeway, if you will, activated either one or the other, and that only one of these was associated with clients really feeling more motivated to set goals, greater rapport with their particular coach, and greater perceptions of coaching success. And it happens to be, I won't go into this slide at all, but these were the two studies. They're very small numbers because, unlike survey research, it's very expensive, very time consuming to bring people in, do some therapy, do some coaching, watch what's going on with the brain and analyze that. So as you can imagine, pretty expensive research as well, but the first I've ever seen, really cool and well done. And really, to cut to the chase of what Richard found, is that one approach to coaching, which is sort of a strengths-based orientation, he calls it compassion-based. It's one where we're not initially focusing on what's the issue, what do you think's underlying that. Think of the GROW model as sort of a generic approach to helping coaching. Coaches that went and used that type of a technique did not have the same activation of the brain areas that were conducive to being motivated to set goals. So the more we can, as coaches, create an environment where our clients are daydreaming about their best self, their future self, their ideal self, and to do that early on and as much as we possibly can within the confines of, gosh, I've got an hour to debrief a personality inventory and go over a 360 and think about their takeaways from that. We know that coaching can sometimes be very challenging given the constraints of how many sessions and what your role is. But if you can, the kind of questions you want to incorporate into your practice early in your sessions, early each session, and certainly if your role is to be, as we often do with some of our clients, we're hired for 1 or 2 hours just to debrief a 360 and go over a personality inventory and come up with an initial development plan. Again, not much we can do. We put on our vendor cap, not what we would ideally like to do or prefer from success perspective, but what we're asked to do. So again, you may not like the language of any of these, but Richard's research very strongly has sort of modified my approach to feedback and coaching, and from a perspective of habit and behavior change, that the more we can get our clients to not obsess over data, to initially not think about what's their problem, what are the key indicators for coming up with solutions to that. Of course, you've got to go there, but delaying that for a little bit and using this in Richard's model, it's kind of managing your ideal self from your current self, and that gap gives a lot of credence for moving people across the two highways or freeways of the brain that are, again, more conducive to feeling as if we can accept feedback from our coach and from others, and increase willingness and motivation to kind of go, yeah, I can see where this is pretty important for me to work on. And for those of you that are familiar with motivational interviewing and kind of the future talk of getting people to explain why there's an advantage, that we can see, again, theoretically what that's doing at a brain level to really grease the sleds for motivational interviewing being very effective as a technique for focusing on future-oriented behavior. So I wanted to just share really quickly, if any of you are really interested in much more detail, you'll have to write me for the article. We've got a few cool things that have come out in terms of PR around this article as part of a special issue last year on the neuroscience of coaching, but really applaud Richard's work as just seminally important in what we've seen at the brain level. So let's move a little bit into more specifics with my very abbreviated time here on what do we know about getting people to change, and answer a few more questions here. I want to be really brief about this, but obviously there's lots of factors that play a role in whether or not we'll be successful in getting your clients to start new behaviors and sustain it. Three that I'll mention, I'm just going to rip through this really rapidly, is the role of physical activity in memory, motivation, and goal setting. The other is sleep, and I'm certainly jet lagged as we speak today, and plays a big role in whether or not you're going to get clients to change. And intuitively and obviously, gosh, what about the personality of my client, and what role does that play in getting us to change? So really briefly, any type of physical activity causes a really interesting brain fertilizer to be initiated. Again, a really fancy label for this. It's called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. So anytime you physically work out, whether it's flexibility or aerobic or strength-based, we find that in fact this particular protein is released at a brain level, and it plays an incredibly large role in solidifying memory and facilitating the neural networks that, again, as neurons fire together, begin to wire together. And we're seeing a lot more of this application of physical activity and learning, if you will, and goal setting being applied in our school system today, where rather than listening to me as you're doing right now in a webinar, probably would be better if all of us could go out, come to the beach here in Santa Monica, and for 50 minutes or so, go for a walk with me, and I'll share things, and just being outdoors and combining physical activity will in fact be related to a release of BDNF and enhance memory learning and learning transfer. And we're certainly learning that the length of the physical activity is also pretty important, so stay tuned. A lot more research, but does play a role in habit and behavior change of getting people to couple physical activity with goal setting as a way of, and learning as a way of facilitating and bridging the two. So I just wanted to say a word about what we know in neuroplasticity, the change of the brain as it relates to physical activity. Certainly we know working out and exercise is very conducive to minimizing, to some extent, early brain functioning and onset of dementia, etc. And this is true whether it's physically learning things or it's mentally learning things. And Pascal Leon in the early 1960s did a cool study in which he took two groups to either really practice a piano piece several days on a real piano, or again a subsequent second group that just had to play visually in their head, brought them back together after several weeks of practice, either mode, and found uncannily that practice can be very imagery-based rather than physically oriented. So whether or not we get our clients to dream about doing something a little bit differently or actually get them to do it, pretty similar outcomes and results. And physical activity has the same impact as well on that. I wish, again, we had a lot more time, which I don't, on the area of sleep. I have one of the first articles, as weird as it sounds, that demonstrates academically that lack of sleep in leaders is an impairment to social and emotional competence. So I don't think we need a research study to say, gosh, we're more of a jerk when we don't feel as if we've got adequate rest and sleep. Ask any new parent, ask puppy raisers, you'll know that. And the area of sleep is very rich. We probably can do another webinar just on the topic of sleep, performance, learning. But certainly, we're a lot of mysteries to the 250,000 hours in our lifespan. 1/3 of our life literally is spent in this sort of magic area where there's two very different types of sleep that are built together. Point I want to make is the more that we get inadequate sleep, it impairs both the networks that solidify memory, solidify our willingness to be open to goal setting. We're all a little bit more closed and defensive. And for any of us that have gotten a terrible night of sleep, we certainly know that even though subjectively you may think you're performing surgery as well, driving a plane as well, solving the world problems as well, you're impaired. And a single night of sleep is sort of equivalent to being legally drunk. If I bring you into a simulator, test you from a psychomotor perspective, even if subjectively you think you're wonderful. So you can't control sleep in your clients, but certainly when people are really stressed and a lot of stuff going on in one's work and life, we have to be at least conscious that their ability to stick with a new goal and build in the social support network has to be even stronger, a little bit more sensitive to that. So certainly sleep and lifestyle habits play a big role in goal setting and sustaining things over time. Motivation, I love this quote, is what really gets us started. The difference between goals being chores and intrinsically motivating is a key, but obviously creating that DNA of continuing things is what a habit is all about. It's a really good quote to take a look at. Personality obviously plays a big role with your clients, and whether you use a newer generation 5-factor personality inventory or your own questions, we certainly know intuitively that people that lack conscientiousness and drive and achievement orientation just aren't as likely to stick with things. They're not likely to set as challenging of goals, and people that are a little less open to change are going to be hesitant to take some prudent risks. And those of us that are more introverted rather than extroverted in a personality sense may not seek feedback, may not evaluate and be open to how am I changing. And certainly we know that people that are much more anxious, nervous, are lower in emotional stability, sometimes we refer to it as high neuroticism, predictively just don't do as well. They get kind of concerned and wigged out in sustaining goals over time, although that initial anxiety might prompt people to want to get started. Now think of anybody in your life that you know that's been surviving a heart attack or an MI. They're really motivated short term, a little bit like my running club, because they're anxious, because they're nervous, but they just don't become part of my running clubs because they don't keep it up. So again, we find that it actually interferes long term with the ability to change. And we do find that all of the personality factors can play a really big role in habit change. And then we find that most of these are pretty good at predicting with individual clients who's likely to get started and stall versus those that get started and keep it up over time. So again, don't have much more time to go into it, but obviously a factor that we look at in whether or not somebody's ready to change and will get started. Henry David Thoreau, great quote, things don't change, we change. It's the focus of the coaching work that we do. And at the brain level, we find that when we use this word and you read this word and you hear the word neuroplasticity, it's pretty diverse. And in fact, Kleiman Jones in 2008 created a pretty good typology that says, kind of like the word validity, there's multiple definitions. And I'll say just a word or two about doing things over and over, use it or lose it, or as we would commonly think about practice and deliberate practice, use it and maybe things will improve. And this is what we're counting on in our coaching work for getting people to try to sign their name with their non-dominant hand over time. And lots of cool research that does suggest that deliberate practice strengthens, again, neural circuits. If it takes 6 to 8 repetitions to get neural circuits to begin to network, it makes some sense that with practice we should build, in fact, strong neural networks. And in fact, this is the case. Many of you might know our company has 2 offices in the UK. One's very close to Cambridge, the other's about an hour away. It's sort of the Cotswolds area, but if you've been over to the UK and London, you've all seen the black or red cabs, and the people that drive them are just unbelievable. They actually have to take a very arduous test to become a taxi cab driver in the UK, and that test is called the knowledge. And they have to have the mental capacity, if you will, to hold, in the old days, the old Thomas guides, but now the GPS maps, to know every nook and cranny and be familiar with every little alley now that's closed because of some work that's being done. They have to be more on top of things than even the GPSs of today. And if you peer into people's brains that have been doing this for years, we find that a particular area related to the brain, which is the hippocampus, it's a visual spatial area, is actually enlarged relative to people that are doing other kinds of roles. And interesting, the same group of people that did the initial research went and grabbed retired taxi cab drivers in London and found that there was shrinkage in those same areas when they stopped doing their professional role, and that's driving. And lots of other studies, won't go over what's here, just some examples that, again, the idea of neuroplasticity, of use it and improve it, is obviously pretty true, and why we want to push our clients to get started and do some things over and over. One of the myths out there, I wish I had more time, I wrote a popular paper on this that's called Urban Talent Myths, is that this is kind of popularized by Gladwell and his one or more of his books. It kind of said, gosh, if you do something for 10,000 hours, you will in fact become expert. And there's very little research to actually support this idea. Practice will help you become better, but in no way does it guarantee that you're going to be proficient or really expert at it. And this research comes from Barbara McNamara, who's at Yale, who did a really cool meta-analysis research in very different domains. And again, pretty much just blew this myth up that, gosh, you could do something for 10,000 hours, but you may or may not be really great at it. You'll be a little bit better intuitively, but this is in fact a complete myth of this target number of what we want our clients to do or not do. Lots of cool research, and today with the popularity of mindfulness meditation, coupled with our ability to peer into people's brains, it doesn't take too long, just a few weeks, that we really can find that there is in fact change at a neural level. We can see thickening of cortical areas, activation of particular areas of the brain related to empathy or stress management that are modified. And we do in fact see that getting people to keep things up over time is pretty important. One of my own studies, which I won't belabor, that I did with a colleague of mine at UCLA, we actually able to demonstrate after 12 weeks of a form of self-hypnosis, meditation at night, drawing blood before and after with the group, we're able to demonstrate not just neural change, but by doing something for 12 weeks in this relaxation realm, we were able to show a significant decrease in one of the inflammatory markers that's very well known, called interleukin-6. It's just a cytokine that's very well studied in stress and resilience research. So again, we have some evidence that if we can get you to use things, new technique, new skill, repeated behavior, we see some neural and neurobiological changes. And the last citing I want to just bring up really rapidly is by a really cool researcher, David Moore, who specializes in autoimmune disorders. And David took a group of people with an autoimmune disorder called multiple sclerosis, and actually do some research work at UCLA with this particular program there. But he found that using the latest brain imagery, getting people to practice for a 24-week program, a whole integrated and very comprehensive stress management program that included yoga, and it included eating nutrition and cognitive reappraisal, a whole set of really great techniques. He was able to demonstrate using two separate and two different brain imagery that he could show significant and pretty impactful change. Didn't make any of the lesions disappear in MS, but it certainly minimized the occurrence of new lesions, new damage, if you will. But what makes this study so interesting, it isn't the fact that, gosh, if you apply strategic stress management, it will in fact be helpful towards the prevention of relapse and the kind of issues that come up with MS. But what he did is he brought people back 24 weeks after the study concluded, found almost all the people stopped practicing what they were taught and what they were asked to do during this 24-week period. And at that point, he saw a resurgence of brand new lesions and an increase and significant increase in the lesions expanding of what was there before. So it's a really great illustration of use it or lose it. And we know this again intuitively that a 1 or 2 session coaching or weeks and weeks of getting people to do only one thing behaviorally once or twice, just again intuitively isn't going to really answer the question of how long does it take to form a habit. So this I turned to Philippa Lally. She's a professor in London who has done really the best research study that we've seen that gives us a pretty interesting indication that for complex behaviors, we really, these could be listening, the kind of work you're doing to enhance handling conflict, managing one's own stress, that it's not likely to create a habit DNA just overnight or 1 or 2 practice sessions, that on average it takes about 60 to 90 days before new behaviors become pretty fluid. So think of, again, your coaching intervention, the length of your coaching, the number of sessions you have, and the request that you have of your clients to do something over and over and over. And we find it a little bit daunting that we probably don't have the ability to influence, even if we have a very long coaching engagement, of getting our clients to practice long and hard enough in order for these complex behaviors to become kind of automatic. So a very important question. And certainly the idea of, gosh, what's the best way to learn? Deliberate practice, as I mentioned, is not going to make you an expert in 10,000 hours, but experiential and practicing things mentally and physically will in fact be a really good approach. And if you follow Center for Creative Leadership, who several years ago came out with quote unquote a little bit of what they call their 70-20-10 ratio for coach and employee development, pretty intuitive that experience is the best teacher, feedback and other types of more passive learning, watching a video can be helpful. But probably that ratio is inaccurate, but at the same time, it does suggest that experience is probably our best baton for passing to our clients for them acquiring and learning new skills. And very briefly, I don't know if you've ever been told as a child, I certainly can recall my mom and dad pretty much hitting me over the head saying, you know, don't quit things. Once you set a goal, work really hard, build some resilience around, you know, expect some failures. But there's some seminal new research that says, you know, at the end of the day, sometimes it's not physically and psychologically healthy to continue on a path of goals that are largely unattainable or very unrealistic. So we can daydream, we can read a lot of popular articles and all sorts of magazines that sound motivational and really say, you know, never give up, you know, set a goal and keep being persistent. But yet there's some really, really strong research by Miller and Roche and Miller and others that really do suggest that sometimes encouraging our clients to be realistic about our goals and cutting our losses might be, in fact, physically healthier than sustaining and batting our head against the wall. So I'll leave it at that. But again, this idea of being told never quit is not always the best advice under certain circumstances with goal setting and the clients we have. And let it go. This is a great moniker actually found in downtown Los Angeles by a graffiti artist that's becoming very well known called Wordsmith. So the time is just letting our clients know that we support their willingness to stop, redefine, reset a new goal may have some health advantages, really important. So when we think about goal setting just in a few minutes, that I have, I just want to sort of summarize that at the end of the day, we really believe now that there are some techniques and approaches for helping our clients see the world a little bit more accurately. As I mentioned, Richard Boyatzis' work says, let's delay getting into data and information and solution focused initially. And we certainly know that for all of us, they're sort of in the middle, the beginning of setting a goal and starting things. We're really motivated. Think of New Year's resolutions. As we get close to the finish line, we're actually really motivated again to finish, but it's this big middle part that we know in research is curvilinear. This is the time when we're most likely to step away from a goal and just quit. So we really want to help our clients to game plan, if you will, in between starting a goal and finishing a goal, what we need to do. And we know from a rewards perspective that we can have our clients focus in the beginning of their goal what they've actually accomplished, and towards the end of our goal, switch their thinking, a little cognitive reappraisal here, to what's left. It's almost like, again, if you subscribe to any of the coffee places that give you a card, you sort of get really excited when there's only a few left that you need to check or get stamped to get a free coffee. And as I mentioned, to enable behavior change, we really want to socially engineer our peer group and those around us to support us. And from a goal setting perspective, if you don't know B.J. Fogg, F-O-G-G, it's down at Stanford, a real guru in the habit and behavior change. This is a cool typology that says, from a goal setting perspective, it's really only 5 things you can do with your clients, like do more, do less, etc. And you want to think about whether or not it's just one time in the world. I want to work with you to run a marathon, or do it sometimes when it's situationally or contextually advantageous, or we want to do it all the time, make it part of your DNA. So keep that in mind. The slides, I won't go into detail, but we certainly know with clients, sometimes writing, sharing, making publicly announcing what you're doing can be very motivating. And it helps people to be a support partner, a goal champion, a goal mentor to you can be very helpful. So there's some things we can do. And from a goal setting perspective, like I say, SMART goals aren't really that smart. And so what we're learning from research is that there's a better way to frame goals with our clients, and these are referred to as implementation intentions. And Robert Golitzer, if you're not familiar with him at New York University, really suggests that there's 2 parts to this. One is to figure out a trigger, if you will. What's the situation that will help prompt a behavior? It can be a time of day, it can be an old habit or behavior you currently do, pair it with something when you go to bed at night or wake up in the morning. Or it could be contextually, gosh, if it's Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 6 in the morning, well, that's the prompt, the trigger for doing something like, I'm going to go sign up for a spin class. So the second part is really what you've committed to do. Go back to the last slide on the kind of increase, decrease, do more, do less. But when we have people write out goals, we have them write out very specifically these 2 parts. And this is a shift from SMART goals to what's called implementation intentions that really does, in fact, in the research literature, enable people to be much more successful in the translation of their goal from an intention to what they're actually going to be doing. So I love this quote too, that someday obviously is not a day of the week. It's how do we get our clients really to do more? And in our research, which I won't go into any detail, we actually have a habit and behavior change platform we call Momentor. So from a coaching perspective, we walk people through, and coaching engagement, we have a way of setting goals and nudging them through email and text reminders and a built-in pulse survey that we can actually evaluate in our coaching work. So I want to encourage you on the call, as you're working with your coaching engagements, to build in that coach process evaluation and goal success evaluation to help you and help your client, and obviously your sponsor, to really understand, have we had success with the habit and behavior change work. And I'll leave this last slide if we have some time for questions. I love Nike's slogan, and sometimes just doing it is great, but at the end, dreams don't work unless you do, meaning how do you get your clients to be wildly successful? So I know we've covered lots of ground here really rapidly, and we may be out of time, but just wanted to close today to say thank you very much for joining me, and I'd be delighted if any of these resources you can't find, just ping me in the future. I'll be delighted to get those back to you. So let me send it back to you, Karen, as we're, I think, at at 12:01 from what I can tell.
I think you're exactly right, Ken, and that was fantastic. You're right, covered so much ground. To let everyone know, this will be on our Orange County YouTube channel. So there are some questions on here. And thank you, Milagros, excellent webinar in the comments here. We had a couple questions for those of you who have to go. We understand, and we'll just try and take 2 minutes here out. Pretty simple questions here considered. Ken, one was about 15 minutes ago asked to talk more about implementation intentions. So I think you actually covered that towards the end again. And then another simple one by Patricia was, when did Boyatzis do his research on DPM?
Yeah, there's been two. The study that was published in our journal, Consulting Psychology, was 2018, and he highlighted and summarized one prior published study in 2015. So they're all very recent. He's actively doing some pretty cool things right now as well.
Nice. Wow. Excellent. Okay. If there aren't any other questions, oh, Donna Lee Barber wanted to know if we would provide the slides as well. Ken, that's up to you. We do record these and put them on our YouTube channel. If it's up to you about the slides.
Yeah, I think if they're available on the YouTube, grab those. And if anybody wants anything specific that you see from the YouTube, write me and I'll be delighted to send you a clipping or a part of that or the whole thing.
That's awesome. Thank you, guys. And where can people find you, Ken, if they want to do that or just to learn more about the research and things that you're writing on?
Yeah, it's at ken@envisialearning.com. Let me go back to my initial front page here. I don't know if you got to leave. Let's see here. And my email address should be right here.
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah, that's a perfect slide. So that's where you guys can find Ken if you have a specific question or if you just want to learn more about the amazing work that he's doing. There is his website. Getting a lot of thank yous in the chat. You're welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. We have our July 25th. We have our chapter meeting. It's on our IFC website as well as Facebook. We're going to be talking about the 50 Shades of Ethics. So hopefully you guys can make it then. Ken, really thank you so much. This was so interesting. I love the neuroscience and the neurobiology and the neuroplasticity. I love all of it. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
All right. Bye, hey, Greta. Okay, everyone. Have a great day today, you guys. Thanks, everybody. We'll see us on the 25th or on the 27th at Greta's Meetup. Have a great day, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.